This is my new self-cleaning aquarium designed to rely on passive internal processes to handle most of the maintenance for me, so it'll take up as little of my time as possible. At the time of recording, the tank is just under 1 month old, it's fully cycled and it's home to its first 2 inhabitants, with more going in the tank soon. I have published an article that explains all of the principles behind this self-cleaning setup in detail that I link to in the description, and I highly recommend you at least skim it if you want to try something like this yourself. This is essentially just a Walstad Method tank that specifically uses lava rock as its rock hardscape of choice because it can slightly tweak things in the tank. Once fully established after month 2 or 3, the only things that I should need to do are add food to the tank for the inhabitants, trim back excess plant growth, top off evaporated water, and potentially do partial water changes once or twice per year to deal with any tannin buildup. So getting into the tank setup, and for this build I've chosen a 12 US gallon or 45 litre tank because my main goal is to upgrade the current Celestial Pearl Danio colony to a larger space, which will give them around double the room they currently have to thrive. This tank size also strikes a nice balance because it's big enough to pack in plenty of plants that help maintain safe and stable water parameters without overcrowding all of the swim space in the mid and foreground of the tank and blocking the view. As usual, I did apply some affordable window privacy film to the back of the tank to improve the overall aesthetics, but this is completely optional and it's just for looks. To start the substrate, I added around ½ an inch of plain, additive-free topsoil designed for use in gardens to form the base nutrient layer. This provides our plants with a long-term source of some micronutrients, but beyond that it also serves several other biological purposes in this specific setup. One of the main advantages of using soil with this specific type of setup is the range of beneficial microorganisms that are in the soil already, especially the waste-eating bacteria like the Bacillus and Pseudomonas genus. These microorganisms help to break down organic matter such as fish waste, leftover food and decaying plant leaves to reduce the amount of maintenance required from us to keep the tank clean and safe. On top of that, as these bacteria break down different types of organic matter, they will also naturally increase the CO2 levels in the tank, helping with plant growth. It's important to note that some of these bacteria are completely non-pathogenic and have never been linked to disease in fish such as Bacillus subtilis. This also has a relatively fast doubling time too, letting it outcompete some of the pathogenic bacteria which can harm our fish for resources to keep their population as low as possible and keep our fish as healthy as we can. This soil also contains other types of beneficial microorganisms such as ammonia oxidizing archaea, nitrifying bacteria and denitrifying bacteria that we'll be using later in the process to help us manage the toxin levels such as toxic ammonia and toxic nitrite. But with this specific setup, none of the bacteria strains are going to be doing any of the heavy lifting when it comes to the cycle. Instead, the fast-growing plants are going to be what takes the lead because we are using a plant-based nitrogen cycle. This is because plants absorb the less toxic ammonium directly from the water column, reducing the total amount of toxic ammonia, which can then get converted into toxic nitrite, effectively cutting off a major source of the nitrogen supply, which can become toxic later in the cycling process. With the nutrient layer in place, I added around ½ an inch of fine gravel to act as part of the capping layer. The grain size for this specific gravel is around 2mm, but anything from 1mm up to 4mm should work perfectly fine. On top of that, I also added around ½ an inch of Horizon Aquatic's Black Galaxy sand. Now this step is also completely optional and I'm only doing it for aesthetic purposes, and I could have just filled up the rest of the capping layer until it was around 1 to 1.5 inches deep with the original 2mm gravel I added first. But I found that the Black Galaxy sand just holds its colour a lot better when underwater, and it doesn't adapt that grey kind of colour a lot of other gravels have. At this point, the substrate is laid exactly how I like it, with the capping layer being roughly twice as thick as the nutrient layer. Next, I added a piece of spare plastic over the substrate to soften the impact of the water that I'll be adding. Even with the diffuser attachment on my siphon, it can still provide enough water force to disturb the substrate layers, which is something we want to avoid, so the plastic helps prevent this. For now, I'm only adding enough water to submerge the substrate by around 1 inch because this helps work any trapped gas out of the substrate while also making it easier to add our plants later. Moving on, and we get to Hardscape, and I decided to keep it as simple as possible with a single piece of Kobo catfish wood and some lava rock for this specific setup. Lava rock's porous structure can, in theory, help reduce maintenance for this type of tank by hosting specialist bacteria deep within its surface. In particular, bacteria such as Anomox and denitrifying strains can help manage toxic ammonia and toxic nitrite levels, as well as the less toxic nitrate levels, providing helpful backups for our plants in case there's any issues with bioload. To attach the lava rock to the wood, I placed some kitchen roll as a temporary bonding layer and then secured everything with aquarium safe glue. I leave this process on screen while I quickly talk about the use of Sirius stone in this type of setup. My tap water has a pH of 6.4, a GH of 4 and a KH of 3. In theory, my KH is just outside of the legacy understanding of beneficial bacteria cycles because anything below KH of 4 can inhibit or even prevent the essential microbial processes for some strains. This is due to some ammonia oxidizing bacteria and nitrite oxidizing bacteria requiring carbon compounds from our KH reading for essential processes. In my case, this really isn't a big issue because a modern understanding of how the cycle actually works shows that a low pH means that ammonia oxidizing archaea, not ammonia oxidizing bacteria, play an important role, as well as Comamox bacteria also becoming a dominant factor, which don't require carbon from our KH reading. But if you do have hard tap water, then traditional ammonia and nitrite oxidizing bacteria will likely play a bigger role in maintaining the nitrogen cycle in your tank, even if it is just as a backup with plants taking the lead. The key thing is that as your tank matures, the ammonia and nitrite oxidizing bacteria use up a lot of the carbon compounds from your KH reading. If your tank's bioload is high and you're only topping off evaporated water, then your KH can slowly deplete and crash the cycle. While CO2 from the respiration of your fish, shrimp, snails and plants can be converted into carbonates via the bicarbonate buffer system, we'd rather use that CO2 for healthy plant growth via photosynthesis. That's where adding a small piece of Sirius stone or any other aquarium-safe limestone-based rock can help. It slowly releases calcium carbonate into the water, and the calcium boosts your GH reading and the carbonate helps boost your KH reading. Depending on your setup, this can keep the system buffered and avoid sudden crashes, keeping things safe. That said, if you're using enough fast-grown plants or your KH and pH are relatively low like mine, you probably don't need to worry about adding some Sirius stone, and I'm not going to add any to this tank just to show it can be done. But back to the Hardscape setup, and with the lava rock and Kobo catfish wood secured, I moved on to adding some epiphyte plants with 1 Anubias Nana coin, 2 regular Anubias Nana and some Bucephalandra Kedagang. These slow-grown plants won't do much in terms of filtration, but they can add great texture and colours to the tank and provide hiding spots for baby fish and shrimp, especially with this being for celestial pearl danios, which despite their small size and cute appearance can be little micro-predators. I did try a few different plant layouts before settling on something that I liked. To attach the plants, I used Horizon Aquatic's aquarium safe glue with the applicator tip on it, which makes it so much easier to make sure the glue is going exactly where you want it. You only need a tiny dab on the plant's roots to keep these plants in place, but take care not to get any glue on the rhizome of the plant because it can cause problems. This is what the Hardscape was looking like with the epiphyte plants added to the tank, and I'm really happy with how things have turned out for this part of the build. With that done, I placed the Hardscape into the tank, making sure to leave plenty of open space around it for adding additional plants later on. I also installed the lighting option, and for this tank I'm using a Chihiros A2 unit. Now I have been using this light on 2 of my other recent tank builds as well, and in all honesty, if I could rewind time I wouldn't go with this light. I just think it's too powerful for low tech tanks and it's just not needed. So moving on, and we get to planting the rest of the tank, and I'm starting with adding the mid-ground plants. I choose to start with the mid-ground plants because in my opinion it makes it easier to position the other plants afterwards, especially the stem plants in the back, which can usually be placed closer together without issue because they generally grow vertically. I began with some Lagenandra Meeboldii Red to the left of the hardscape, and I'm curious how this one develops as I am new to this plant. Then I added 2 Echinodorus Tropica plants in front of the hardscape, and their compact size should fit nicely in this area of the build. On the right hand side I added some Alternanthera Reineckii mini, and this is my first time using any variety of Alternanthera, so I am looking forward to seeing how it does. Just behind that I placed some Cryptocoryne Nurii, which should grow slightly taller than the Alternanthera Reineckii mini and fill out that area quite nicely with some orange and pink tones if it colours up correctly. But I do want to stress that all of these plants are primarily chosen for their appearance and for providing hiding spots for baby fish and shrimp rather than their abilities to naturally purify water, because they do tend to be slower growers. You can see from this angle how I've chosen to leave both the foreground and background of the tank open for additional planting. For the foreground I chose Helanthium Tenellum green, which I think is the best low-tech carpeting plant in the hobby by far. I do have an article covering some other great low-tech carpeting options which I'll link in the description, but for this setup Helanthium Tenellum green is perfect. Once it grows in and forms a carpet, it should look great while also creating more hiding spots for baby fish and shrimp. Over time it will start sending out runners towards the back of the tank as well, but hopefully the other plants will dominate that space and prevent light blocking issues from occurring. This is what the tank is looking like at this stage of the build, and the plants are filling out nicely, and next I moved on to the faster growing background plants. These are key to natural water purification in this type of setup and will hopefully absorb large amounts of ammonium as their primary nitrogen source, helping to reduce the amount of the other toxic nitrogen compounds occurring in the tank, keeping everything safe. I started with 8 stems of Limnophila Sessiliflora, which I got from one single pot. I highly recommend this plant for any type of setup like this, but it is a controlled species over in the United States. If you are over in the United States, then consider something like water wisteria or any other fast-grown hygrophila species instead, and it should do well. To add some red to the background, I planted some Ludwigia Mini Super Red. This is sold under a few different names, so it can be confusing, but once it's established, it's an easy to keep red plant that should grow well in my tank. It starts off slow but eventually picks up a moderate growth rate, which will also help naturally purify the water in the tank. Next I planted what was sold to me by an eBay seller as Bacopa Monnieri. Unfortunately here in the UK it's common for sellers to accidentally list Bacopa Monnieri Compact as the standard version, but they act very differently. In the US, a lot of people report that Bacopa Monnieri grows quickly and works very well for this type of setup. But the compact version, which is commonly confused with the regular version here in Europe because the plant nurseries here only sell the compact version, usually gets to around 15 centimeters in height and then just stops growing. But I really want to try some real Bacopa Monnieri, so I decided to let this grow in the tank just to see what happens. After that, I added some Hygrophila Bucephalandra 53B, which can have a decent growth rate in the right tank. I really do think that this plant does better in tanks with higher KH levels than my standard tap water though, because it does quite well in one of my other tanks which uses Sirius stone as its hardscape and buffers the KH level in that specific tank. But in my tanks with inert hardscape like this one, it does seem to struggle, potentially because I have softer, acidic water with a low KH. Anyway, this is what the tank was looking like at this stage of the build, and it might look a little crowded, but with this type of setup, the more plants in the tank, especially faster to moderate grown plants, the better the water stability will be. Here's a top-down view so you can see the layout more clearly, with the faster grown plants in the background that will get taller and the moderate to slower grown plants in the middle which are shorter, helping to improve visibility across the entire tank. With this tank still being lightweight, I moved it over to my rack where it will live long term before filling it with water. Then I added a small piece of plastic to protect the substrate layers and filled the tank with regular tap water, but I did dose some tap water conditioner to remove chlorine, chloramines and neutralise heavy metals. To finish off the planting, I added some floating plants, as these are an excellent option for this type of setup where we are relying on the plants to naturally purify the tank water. I went with some Salvinia Minima for its decent growth rate, but this is an extremely hardy floating plant and it's great for beginners. I also added some red root floaters to the tank too, which are slow grown and can be a little finicky, but they look beautiful when they colour up with their red hues. Here's what the tank looks like when fully filled, and over the next few days the plants will adjust and begin growing towards the light source of the tank and straighten out. Unfortunately, my hardscape did start floating, but this can be common when using lightweight porous lava rock to weigh it down. In my experience though, as the wood becomes more saturated with water, it will sink as water fills up the gas pockets within the wood. Finally, I added a heater and set it at 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit. That temperature should keep all of the microorganisms in the tank happy, while also keeping the plants happy and preventing dormancy from setting in during the colder months of the year to keep them naturally filtering the water. So moving on to month 1, and this is what my water parameters were looking like 12 hours after setting the tank up, with an ammonia level of 0.5 ppm, which is completely normal for the soil I'm using with this setup. It is worth noting that test kits measure total ammonium nitrogen or TAN, which includes both toxic ammonia and the far less harmful ammonium in one reading. Due to my tank's low pH level, a lot of this reading will actually be the far less harmful ammonium rather than the toxic ammonia, so it's not really anything to worry about. As you can see here, the water is cloudy at this stage, and this is mostly due to water-soluble nutrients leaking from the soil after the build. These nutrients either cloud the water directly or feed early bacterial blooms which will cloud the water, and it's very common in week 1, and it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong with your tank. So I decided to do a 50% water change to help remove the excess nutrients causing the clouding and keep things stable. Thankfully, this water-soluble nutrients leaching only happens in the first few weeks, and once that's done, the maintenance requirements for this type of tank drops off significantly. By day 2, the ammonia level was back to 0.5 ppm, which again is normal for this soil at this stage of a build, but as you can see, the cloudiness has faded completely. At this point, I did choose to add a small USB water pump to improve the circulation in the tank. Now this is not required, but it drastically reduced the maintenance requirements of the tank after adding it, and I do highly recommend you get one. The flow helps distribute toxins around the tank by forcing the water to come into contact with the plants more regularly so they can filter out any potential problems. I did have to get the pump online, and it was delivered late in the evening, so the tank lights had already turned off by the time I added it to the tank. By the next day, the ammonia levels had dropped to 0.25 ppm in the tank. Now this could be due to the water-soluble nutrients dissipating, but I also think the water flow from the pump is also helping to get the plants to absorb the toxins quickly. Also, on day 3, the driftwood had finally sank back into place onto the lava rock with no extra effort being required on my part. My Tradescantia order had also arrived, and while this is optional, it is a great addition to this type of setup. I mounted the cuttings in an emergent 3D printed plant holder made by my friend who owns MMS Designs over on Etsy, and I linked to it in the description. You will need to get some 5mm dowel sticks, which are easy to find and very affordable to act as plant supports, but they go straight into the plant holder to help support the plants as they grow. Then you just rest the holder on the back of your tank so the base of the stem is in the water, allowing roots to grow and suck up excess nutrients and keep the tank safe. There are a bunch of different suitable houseplants for this, but Tradescantia cuttings are very affordable, come in a wide range of different colours and tend to grow very well, making them a great option. I added the holders on the back glass pane of my tank, but you can put these on the sides if you want, it just depends on your specific setup. One of my other tanks does have some Tradescantia green hill grown in it and it hasn't had any issues, so I'm hoping these will do the same and thrive. I'm using some very basic entry-level 10-pound grow lights to help this Tradescantia grow. It's nothing fancy and they've worked well in the other tanks where I've done things similar to this. Anyway, by the next day, both the ammonia and nitrite levels were at 0 ppm. I also have another tank very similar to this one that I built at the same time, but I added the USB water pump straight away with that and it's never had a detectable nitrogen hit. So I do think that this is down to having an active source of water flow in the tank as well as the plant combination, especially the Limnophila Sessiliflora and Salvinia Minima just absorbing a lot of ammonium to effectively manage the rest of the toxic nitrogen compounds in the tank. I did notice some early melting on the Alternanthera Reineckii mini, which is something I was half expecting because I've seen so many people say this can be a challenging plant to keep. By day 7 the water parameters were still stable with 0 ammonia or nitrite showing up in the tank, so I did decide to stop doing any type of water changes to see what would happen. The Tradescantia was starting to look a little bit rough, but considering this spent nearly a week in transit before I actually received it from the seller, I was hoping it would just be a temporary setback and it would turn itself around. Meanwhile, the Salvinia Minima had absolutely exploded in growth rate during the first week of this tank, at least quadrupling its size on the surface. By week 2, algae had started to form in the aquarium, which is a good sign that the tank is stabilising and natural sources of life are taking hold. I still hadn't had any detectable nitrogen sources on my test kits since before day 7, suggesting that the plants were doing their job and everything was going to plan. The Limnophila Sessiliflora was growing extremely quickly, while the Helanthium green was already beginning to carpet, and surprisingly, the Alternanthera Reineckii mini was recovering and showing some growth. Most of the Tradescantia had also started to show signs of growing too, and the Ludwigia mini super red was starting to slowly colour up. By week 3 the tank was really starting to take off and the Salvinia was dominating the surface of the tank, while the Limnophila Sessiliflora had at least doubled in size, the Helanthium green was growing rapidly, and the Alternanthera Reineckii just continued to look stronger and stronger, recovering. But the Bacopa Monnieri and Hygrophila Siamensis 53B hadn't really done much and they weren't really showing any signs of growth. I still hadn't had any detectable nitrogen in the tank since before day 7, giving me more and more confidence that the tank is starting to take hold and work. I did have to remove some of the Salvinia with my trusty hair comb just because it was starting to block light penetration for the tank, which is something I want to avoid. While removing the excess Salvinia, I noticed that all 6 of the Tradescantia stems had also begun to root, which is another encouraging sign. Fast forward to week 4, just 2 days before this recording, and this is what the tank is looking like after a full month of minimal maintenance or interaction. The surface is looking pretty rough, covered in Salvinia and filamentous algae, but I do suspect the really powerful Chihiros A2 light is partially to blame for that one. It is by far the most powerful light that I've ever used on any of my tanks, so it is kicking out a lot more power than anything I have more experience with. Thankfully, most of the Tradescantia stems were also putting out new visible growth, confirming my suspicion that it just needed a little more time to establish itself and kick out roots to get some nutrients. So moving on to the plant's first major trimming and cleanup session, and I started by scooping out more excess Salvinia because it was growing at a rapid pace, as well as trying to get as much of the filamentous algae out as possible using a hair comb. Then I scraped algae off the tank glass as there's still no algae-eating livestock in the tank at this point. Before doing a water change, I tested the current water parameters one last time, and as you can see there's still no detectable signs of ammonia compounds in here. I drained most of the water from the tank to give the plants a proper trim and reshape some of the plants in the background. This is what the Tradescantia root systems were looking like by this point, and this is just 1 week after the initial rooting clip I showed earlier in the video. They grow very quickly, so I will need to keep an eye on them and trim them if necessary. My Limnophila Sessiliflora had absolutely dominated the growth in this tank, so it definitely needed a big trim to get it in order. I'm not doing anything special here, I'm just trimming it to the height I want it in the tank with some Aquascape and shears, but regular scissors work perfectly fine too. My Hygrophila Siamensis 53B was stagnant and not doing anything, so I just decided to remove it because I do have some in another tank for testing, so that'll be my test clump. I'll be replacing this Hygrophila with more Limnophila Sessiliflora stems to improve the natural filtration of the tank, because if you remember back at the start of the video, I said my main goal for this tank is to double the available size for my Celestial Pearl Danio colony. But it's peak breeding season right now, and my Celestial Pearl Danio colony is already at least doubled in size since I started to set this tank up. But with all the Limnophila, Salvinia and Tradescantia in this tank, the extra fish load can increase the bio load to benefit plant health with the extra nutrients. This is how much of the Limnophila Sessiliflora that I'd actually trimmed, and these are essentially 3 plants grown in this tank in 1 month. Being stem plants, you just replant these healthy tops back into the substrate and they will grow roots and grow as an individual plant, helping to keep your costs down. But it is worth noting, the more Limnophila Sessiliflora stems you have in your tank, the more stems you're going to have to trim a little bit every 2 to 3 weeks depending on their growth rate in your tank once established. Anyway, once I was happy with the layout, I refilled the tank with fresh tap water and added some tap water conditioner to keep things stable. This is what the tank looked like immediately after the maintenance session, and the Limnophila Sessiliflora will bounce back within a week and look normal. I did notice that my Helanthium Tenellum green was starting to melt. I have seen this before, and it can possibly due to transitioning from emergent growth to submerged growth, but it could be due to a lack of nutrients in the tank because the Limnophila, Salvinia and Tradescantia are just sucking it all up, but that will change soon as I start to get more stocking into it. The Bacopa Monnieri still hadn't done much, so I am going to give it 1 more month before replacing it just to see if it will start to grow, but I really am leaning more towards it just being Bacopa compact that's been missold. The Alternanthera Reineckii mini is really starting to take hold and it's starting to look great, but there is a lot of brown diatom algae on the plant, so I can't wait to see what it looks like once I get some shrimp in here to pick all that off. The Cryptocoryne Nurii hadn't grown much, but I'm pretty sure this is a hard water crypt, so with my soft tap water it does take longer to grow. I have this in one of my other tanks and once established it looks great. The Lagenandra Meeboldii Red is putting out some new submerged growth, but again this is my first time with this plant, so I really don't know what to expect, but I am waiting to see what happens long term. To help manage algae growth, I added 2 Nurite snails, 1 Zebrina Nurite which I've previously kept, and 1 red onion Nurite which is new to me. I dropped them in the tank away from the water pump so I could add a small treat which was going to be Fluval Bug Bites bottom feeder formula. I even took the time to manually place the granules right in front of them so the snails couldn't miss them once they came out of their shell to move around, but the Zebrina Nurite snail decided to go exploring and leave his treat behind, while the red onion Nurite snail seemed to be having a nap. Anyway, that brings us up to today, and this is what the tank is looking like right now, and I'm honestly really happy with how everything's going with this build. I've spent the last 18 months researching and testing different things for this type of setup, and it feels like all of the effort is paying off. Next week, or maybe the week after, I will be ordering shrimp to add to this tank. I'm planning on going with orange Neocaridina shrimp, but I have had some issues with the orange variety in the past, so I might change my mind and go with something else. There's also a good chance I'll be adding some Armano shrimp to help manage the algae and detritus in this tank while the Neocaridina shrimp establishes themselves and start breeding too. As for my Celestial Pearl Danios, I'm still undecided whether I want to add these in month 2 or wait until month 3. Right now it's peak breeding season and things are going really well with their current tank, and even though you can't really see them because of the dwarf Sagittaria completely taken over, they are constantly breeding. Every week I'm seeing more fry in the tank, so I am leaning towards leaving them in here for at least another month to get as many baby CPDs as possible before moving everything over. But with so much Limnophila Sessiliflora, Salvinia Minima and Tradescantia in the tank sucking up all the nutrients, I am also thinking about moving some over just to get some more bio load in there for plant health too. As I mentioned at the start of the video, I did put together a fully sourced, in-depth article explaining all of the concepts that I'm using to build this tank, which I link to in the description, and I do recommend you read it if you are thinking of setting something like this up yourself. I link to the monthly update playlist for this tank in the description so people watching the video in the future can click it and watch all of the monthly updates in order and track its progress. Anyway guys, that brings the video to an end. I hope it's been helpful and thanks for watching and good luck with any similar tanks you try in your fish room.